Thank you for everyone for coming. This is absolutely fantastic. And it looks like there are people here that are as excited about this as I am. I have literally been excited about this talk for about a year. About a year ago, Tim contacted us and said he was coming to Portland to drop off his work for the PMA biennial, which is an excellent way to approach a gallery. And said, hey, can I swing by and show you what I'm doing and talk about a project? And so we said, yes, of course. And he came by and he told us about the prior trip he had on a container ship to Australia. And he was going to go on a second trip, this time to Borneo, lots of other places too. And then come back and create porcelain pieces from it, prints, a book. It sounded incredible. He told us the timeline. It sounded perhaps a bit mad. But we were in, because that's what we like, maybe. And then, as you can see, standing in this room with all of this beautiful work, he did it. And so we're just absolutely thrilled and can't wait to hear about the voyage and how all this work got created, especially in a short time frame. At least I thought it was a short time frame. As I mentioned, Tim was in the PMA biennial last year. He's taught and teaches all over the state of Maine, including being an artist teacher at the Farnsworth. But rather than me continue to go on, we're all here to hear Tim, and very excited.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I am deeply honored that you all would come and spend your Saturday afternoon. I know how valuable time is. So I'll get right to the point. So the format of today will be that I'll just kind of yammer on for a while about the work and about the project and why I made all of this work and why I made it the way that I did, how I came to be on the container ship and how I came to actually make pots. And then I hope that there'll be some questions, and then you can just ask me anything, and then I'll just yammer on about that. So what you're looking at really is, if I were in school, this would be like my term paper. This would be like my final project. It would be wrapping it up. And the book in the back, written with co-writer Carri Lange here. Would you just stand up and just, I know, and then you can sit down quickly. We started in on this project together to document in as many different ways as possible what started out as a mega transect around the world. So I generally work around themes of global warming. The things that I record and the things that I understand about the world, I tend to think of in terms of systems. So I think about relationships between like crows and barred owls. I think about relationships between lobster fishermen and right whales. I think about relationships between starlings and cities, things like that. And I tend to record those in porcelain because I'm also aware that we're in a time of incredible ecological and therefore social change as well. The time that we're living in right now is kind of a pinnacle in my mind. I'm very fortunate to see these systems and also to be able to record them on the most durable medium that we have, which is porcelain. So my work is, I think of it as functional, but it's not functional in the strict traditional sense of, say, you know, a vase that's been made to hold flowers or a cup that's been made to hold liquid. Yes, they refer to those forms, but they are functional in the sense that they hold information. And so my job, when I'm successful, is to take something that I know about the world and record it on this porcelain with an idea that if that pot were dug up in 100,000 years, that anything with an eyeball and an ability to think abstractly is going to know what I'm talking about. That's why I work in porcelain. Essentially, even if this vase here smashed apart, the information is still there, and someone, if they cared about it enough, they could put it together and know what I was talking about. Right up until it's either ground under a glacier or melted under a volcano. That's kind of my benchmark. So I was given the opportunity to give a Pachakacha talk at Waterville Public Library, which I did, and I put it up online, and then someone in Australia saw it. And they said, wow, this is exactly what we're looking for. We're putting on a wood firing conference called Smoke on the Water. And it's on the future of traditional ceramics. And would you come to Australia to give us your talk? And I thought, geez, you know, on the one hand, totally honored, and I've always wanted to go to Australia. But I just couldn't justify being someone who works in global warming issues, spending 2,000 gallons of jet fuel to get to Australia and give a talk that they could see just as well online. But I really wanted to go, and I thought it was important. And I do think that content rather than function is the future of ceramics. So then I thought, well, if I go by container ship, I should be able to go for like 1.5 gallons of fuel. So then I was like off and running, right? So then I Googled, how do I get passage on a container ship? And I found that there were these couple companies that do this. I wrote to them. I wrote to Australia, said I'll be there. I'm working out the details, but I think I'm showing up by ship. And I should have this whole body of work that I create while I'm out there. So then I had all of these raw materials, right? I had a month, and I had a month in time in the most remote places in the world. There were times when I was out there when I was like 1,300, 1,400 miles from the nearest person, maybe 1,500 miles from the nearest land. Very, very remote, more remote than I've ever been. And I understood also that those places are changing as quickly as the places that are around us that we see all the time. So again, I found myself in the unique position of being able to permanently record my observations of the systems as well as I could understand them, and to document what I saw out there in a really permanent way. So over the course of that 30 days, the etchings are what I created, and then the porcelain is in response to that. As well, I was keeping journal entries, so I would spend half of every day up in the bow of the ship with my binoculars, just looking and observing, and I recorded every organism that I could identify and that I could count. So sometimes I was seeing 100 flying fish per minute over the course of the whole time, and so I would write that. Sometimes I would be out there for 5 hours and I would see like 3 shearwaters once, and I would write that, along with where I was and the temperature and the time and the date, and I'm on international shipping lanes, so it's all reproducible. I was also keeping track of what was happening to me on a personal level, because it was really important to me that where I had all of this time and where I really was going to be in totally new places, I wanted to see what would happen if I took myself out of everything that was familiar. And so I was recording all of my observations about myself and all of my observations about the world that I had left behind. I was not inundated with the internet. It was really hard to contact anyone. I actually didn't have any contact for about the first 2 weeks that I was at sea. And so that gave me a really good opportunity to step outside of this world that we all live in and record that, and then to build upon that. When I came back, Carri and I started talking, and Carri interviewed me for about 30 hours, maybe, and had the journal entries and organized it into what we see today. And we went back and forth with revisions. And we worked on that book for about, well, since then. So that would have been September of last year, so about 1.5 years ago. And then that was all also in the lead up to the next trip that I was going to take, which was going to go the other way around. So that first trip went from Philadelphia to Sydney. I went down the East Coast and across the Caribbean Sea and through the Panama Canal and across the Pacific. And then this last one, I left from South Carolina and we had to skirt a hurricane. So we went all the way up to the Grand Banks, and then all the way down again to the Azores, and then through Gibraltar and through the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, Red Sea, and then across the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean to Malaysia. And then from there to Borneo, and then to Australia, and then finally back again. And what it wound up doing was giving me a mega transect around the world, so that I saw all of the major oceans of the world, and I essentially cut this line that went as best as I could all the way, and I documented all of the all of the species that I saw out there. And so that's book 2. That's the one that we're working on now. And hopefully that'll be out later. But during it all, what I really needed to do was be able to record my observations in as many different ways as possible. I really believed that, and I do believe, that my job is first and foremost as a communicator. And it just so happens that the way that I'm most comfortable and the way that I can be most specific is speaking universal visual language, or speaking through art, right? But that's not how everybody else speaks. That's just how I speak most easily. So I needed to be able to translate that into lots of other ways of speaking so that people who don't naturally look at a vase with skipjacks on it and know, oh, it's a vase with skipjacks, that they can have access to that information too. So that's why the book, that's why the prints, and that's why the porcelain. When I was out there, I intentionally put myself in a place where everything was chaotic. So when I walked up the gangway the first time to get onto that ship in Philadelphia, I had the palpable sense that I was giving up all control of my life. And that was something that I had been thinking about and preparing for a number of months. Anyone who knows me knows that this would be like a problem for me. And anyone who looks at my artwork, I mean, frankly, can know that this would be a problem for me too. But it was vital that I be able to do that. It was vital because in this chaos, right, in this mix of just everything, all of the systems being blown apart, then I would be able to take myself away from my preconceptions about how pieces should fit together and maybe be able to gain some insight into how they actually fit together. And I was prepared for those things to be different. I was expecting those things to be different. I was definitely hoping those things would be different. I did not see a lot of ways that the interactions between the animals and the environment that I was moving through fit together in ways that were surprising. But there were numbers of things that I found out about myself and that I started to discover about the culture that I came from that were surprising to me that I hadn't thought about. Those became grist for the mill of the book. And so ultimately, as you go through the book, as you start in the beginning, it tends to be straight journal entries. And like, I saw 5 fine fish, or I saw 2 boobies, or it was nice out, or whatever. And then towards the end, those things became far less compelling to me than the things of like, what do we do about gun violence? How do we handle the ideas of inclusion and exclusion? How do we handle the ideas of the people who came before us having a claim to the land and we having a claim to the land, and how do you balance those things so that we all can wind up moving in the same direction and not moving in opposition? Those tended to be the places that I went. I didn't know that's where I was going to go, but I was prepared to go wherever that was. Along the way, there were a number of harrowing experiences. I had going across the Pacific Ocean, we ran into a giant typhoon that the crew thought that I may have had a part in causing. They thought that I was a Jonah, so they thought that I was bad luck. And I didn't know. Like I said, I went into this not knowing anything, so I had done no research on ship culture or maritime culture or anything like that. I didn't know that you're not supposed to whistle on deck. I didn't know that you're not supposed to talk about storms. And on this particular ship, the word banana was a word you're just not supposed to say, but I didn't know that. So, you know, I'm like whistling about ships and bananas and storms for a number of days, and then we wound up with a giant storm, and the crew wanted to toss me. And the captain luckily kept them from doing that. But he finally came to me and he said, you know, you're really lucky. Like 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to stop them. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, we wanted, you know, the crew thought you were bad luck. They wanted to chuck you. And I thought he was joking. And this happened all the time. He was from Ukraine. I don't speak Ukrainian. He really didn't speak very good English. And so he would tell me things, and I would think that he was joking. I thought he was being sardonic. But sardonism is not something that came naturally to him. And so generally when I thought he was being sardonic, it was just that he was being really, really serious. And so what wound up happening, the way that I got out of that situation was that we were supposed to go into this typhoon, and we knew that it was coming. And it was so big that it went from the ice in Antarctica all the way up to all these uncharted islands in French Polynesia, and it was coming right towards us. And it was coming faster than our ship could go back. So we had to go through it. And the waves were projected to be like 13 meters when we went through it. And our ship was rated for 7. And so the captain came to me, and I had an inkling, and this is actually when I started having contact off the ship. I started to get a really weird feeling when the captain came to me and he said, you know, and my cabin was up about 11 stories from the water surface. And he came to me and he said, you know, you're up all this distance, and if our ship rolls over, you're going to be down all that distance down below, and all this great artwork is gone. All this hard work that you put in is going to be gone. And I thought, why are you telling me this? Like, I kind of know this, but... And he was kind of accusatory about it. And then, and I started to get a weird feeling about it. And I said, you know, I think I really need to have an email account so that I can write home. And so he set me up with an email account. And then we got closer and closer to the storm. And then finally we went through the storm, and it was only 11 meters, right? So it was like 35-foot seas for about 2 days. And I had this recliner in my cabin. It was an office chair, really. And I kind of wedged it in the corner up against a counter and up against a bolted down couch. And I just spent the 2 days like that with my feet up on the counter, leaned back so that as the ship went this way, I would just kind of wind up lying down in the office chair. And then as I went this way, I would almost be standing up on the counter. But we made it. And I went up, and that was kind of when he told me afterwards. I was up in the bridge, and I was drinking a cup of coffee, and it was still pretty wavy. It was still pretty like, I don't know, 6, 7 meter seas, like significant, but you know, nothing like what we had seen. And so I'm drinking coffee, and I'm feeling pretty good, and the captain came up and he said, you know, you're lucky, and we had that whole interaction. And I said to him, I am lucky, actually. I'm really surprised to hear you say that, because almost everybody who knows me would say that I have like an inordinate amount of luck, like way more than I deserve. And somehow I managed to scrape through all of these scrapes, and I managed to be happy, and I managed to have this amazing life. I'm really interested that you guys think that I'm bad luck. You know, maybe the reason why it was only 11 meter seas, and maybe the reason why we made it through was because I was on board. And you could see everybody just kind of go like that. And then I became the good luck charm for the ship. And then I had a totally different problem. And that was that like every meal, everybody expected me to drink a bottle of wine with them. And the chef wanted to keep me happy. And so where everybody else would get 15 Korean dumplings, I would get like 70. You know, and all of these people had lived through just terrible famines. And so I could not leave anything on the plate. And I started to really dread meals for a completely different reason. Yeah. So that's what the first one was like. And then the second trip was really different. I did not go into it as naive. I went into it with a great deal of knowledge about it. The problem on the second one was much more external. The things that I was captivated by were much more external. It had to do with actually a lack of stimulation. I was out on this one for 31 days, and the majority of what I saw out there was plastic. It was terrible, terrible to see and terrible to say. There weren't really, I didn't have a day when I saw 100 flying fish per minute. I had days when I saw like 2. And I saw days when I saw a piece of recognizable plastic maybe every 5 seconds for days and weeks. And then this would be interspersed with like a pirate attack or with a guy falling down a stairwell and basically ripping his arm off, or dealing with Egyptian smugglers, or anything like that. And the second one was a much more professionally run ship. It was designed to be boring. It was designed to be just every day being the same as the day before. And it really was. I had been on kind of this rogue ship the time before, and I thought it was going to be like that, and I was prepared for it. I mean, besides the getting thrown overboard part, I actually had a really good time out there. And this one, it was a dry ship, which the other one was not. And so that was entirely different too. It gave me a lot of food for thought. And then when I came back, I then had to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to place this into my own context? How am I going to let this change the work that I've made before? Because that was kind of the point, right? To change my perception of the world around me, change the way that I record, the systems that I operate in, the world around me, and also to be able to communicate that effectively to other people. So I started working with a lot more forms. I started being really specific about the things that I was describing. And I started referring to specific thoughts that I had in the sculptures and thinking about those things as artifacts of thought. So like the European Starling over here, that is an illustration, a 3D illustration of a component of the book, which talks about European starlings coming here and being brought here back in the 1800s because someone thought it would be really great to have all of the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's plays available in Central Park in New York. Of course, birds fly, and they didn't stay in Central Park, and they went everywhere, right? And so one of the feelings now is that people hate European starlings. They hate them because they take over lots of niches and they scare away lots of other birds. And they are fairly destructive to crops. And so generally people feel like, oh, well, we should just eradicate the European starlings. But this is our problem, right? This is something that we created. And ultimately the starlings that we kill or eradicate are going to be the ones that pay that price. And so I think a lot about that because I'm not sure what the solution is to that. I don't know where that takes me. But I do know that if we were to kill the 5 billion starlings or whatever it is in the United States, that none of those are to blame for our perception of that predicament. And so then, of course, that leads me to the thought that, well, you know, maybe what we need to do is just let everything go where it's supposed to go and not try and control things so much. And that maybe the controlling is the problem. And that maybe if European starlings wind up here, wherever they came from originally, if they have problems there, well, at least they have a home here. I have no idea whether this is a good idea, but it's kind of where my thinking goes. And so when I'm making these pieces, they tend to be symbols for that kind of thought. Are there any questions so far? Anybody have any questions so far? So on the second one, I wound up in Malaysia. I wound up in a place called Klang, which they call it a village. It's a village of 1 million people. And it was developed just out of nowhere. It used to be a palm plantation. And then they needed that land. They needed land for housing for people to work in the shipping industry. So the Malaysian government just built this huge city and then said, everybody can come here and live for free if you want to live here. And there's plenty of work. So I landed there and I got my feet under me. And then I flew to Borneo for 2 weeks. And it was about maybe, I don't know, 150 miles or something like that. And what I was really interested in Borneo were the jungle systems. The jungles there are being kind of displaced by a lot of the palm plantations. And so I felt like, well, now's really the time. If I want to see these things, I probably should see them. So I went there and everybody was like, go see the orangutans. And of course I wanted to see the orangutans too, but that was not primarily what I was really into. I was much more into the birds or I thought I was going to be much more into the birds. But then when I got there, the orangutans and the primates there were really what was captivating to me. So I spent a lot of time in the lowlands in Sepalok, walking around in the jungle and looking at the orangutans and kind of trying to figure out how they communicate. One of the neat things about them is that they communicate visually, same as I do, right? Except for they don't make sculpture, they don't draw yet, but they change their facial expressions. And so I had the great honor to be about this far away from an orangutan for about maybe 15 minutes. And it was looking at me, it was engaged a little bit. But basically, I got the feeling that it really kind of wanted me to just move along. But of course, I wasn't going to do that. And so I stayed there and I looked at it and I just kept clicking my phone, just like click, 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 that. And then I cycled through all the photographs and every single facial expression was unique. And it was recognizable and it was incredibly human. I mean, their facial structure is totally different, but the way that their face communicated was recognizable to me. And I had no perception that this was happening when I was looking at it. And it sparked in me that, oh, these guys speak visually too. They're using a different alphabet maybe, but they're speaking a similar language. And so that launched me on kind of this project that I'm working on now. You know, these things never really end for me. But I'm working on this project now where I would like to actually see if I can set up or I can build a basis. I can help teach orangutans to make sculpture in porcelain. And because they already know how to speak visually, right? They already have the ability to think abstractly. They already have the ability to use their eyes. They have everything that I would need if I were in front of a classroom of second graders. They have everything that I would need to be able to teach a second grade classroom to make art and to communicate well about what their impressions of the world are. So that is kind of the next step, I think, for me. One of the challenges, I assume this is true for artists in general, but for this artist specifically, one of the challenges is that I'll think that I'm working on a project, right? And I'll think that, okay, this is the end. And I'll get to that end, and I'll realize that actually what I've been doing is I've been creating a component for a greater project. So what is the product becomes a material. And then what was the material becomes the product, and then it becomes the material again. And so it just kind of snowballs out. And that's what these trips have given me. They've given me all these avenues to explore in that way. Let's see. So the etching process, the ones that you see on the wall, these are dry points. In keeping with the idea that I would go out there with nothing being familiar to me, one of the things that I really needed to do was find a way to express myself that was new. So I decided to pick up a new medium, and that was dry point etching. I had never done this before. I figured that it was probably pretty similar to the sgraffito that I work with, but I purposefully did not research it any more than to decide that I was going to work on plexiglass rather than copper. That was because of Lisa Pixley. She's a printmaker in Portland, and I've known her for a number of years, and I was like, yeah, Lisa, I'm going on this journey, and I'm going to carry like 40 pounds of copper with me. And she's like, don't do that. Take this stuff. And it's just super flexible plexiglass. And I could roll it up and put it in my pack. And I could keep 40 plates in my pack, and it would weigh about a pound. And it would be able to manage getting beaten around on my back the whole time. So I was disciplined that every day I would go out and half the day I would observe and then half the day I would etch. And the rule that I set for myself was that what I would etch would be the most compelling thing that I saw that day. If I couldn't figure out how to etch it, then that was an opportunity for me to learn. That was, so if I had the thought like, oh, that was really cool, but I have no idea how I'd say that, like automatically I had to do it. Or the other rule that I had was if I said, oh, that'd be really neat, but man, that'll take forever, like I automatically had to do it. And so that would happen to me pretty frequently, where I would be like, oh, that's a sweet idea. And I'm like, damn it, I gotta do that now. And so you can see on some of these, especially in the book, you can see that there's an evolution that goes along. And I like to think that I got better as I went. My drawings get more complex. I'm able to use it. I'm able to use the lines more intricately, and I'm able to be more faithful to what it is that I was seeing out there. There is a definite difference between the ones that I did on the first trip versus the second. And that difference, I didn't do any etching in between. But that difference is that on the ones from the first trip, which is like this storm piece over here, the dolphin hunting over there, and then the 3 storm petrels over there on that back wall. Those were from the first trip. I etched those without knowing what the printmaking process was going to be. So I didn't really have a clear idea of how to use the ink. And I didn't have a clear idea of how they would translate onto paper, how the lines would translate onto paper. I went into those, etching those as if they were porcelain. The only difference was that the lines that I was making are black, and the lines that I make on porcelain are white. When I came back, Running with Scissor Studios, where I work now when I'm in Portland, sponsored me, and they said, we heard you went on this big project, you didn't know how to print, but you have all these plates. We'll teach you, and we have a facility, and why don't you come down and you can use the facility for a month. And we've got this guy, Carter Shappy, and he'll be happy to teach you how to use the equipment. So, oh, that'll be great. Sounds good. I should be able to do that in a day. And, you know, I'm still there, basically. But it took me about 2 weeks to pull the prints of all of the work that I had made from that first trip. But I was able to pick up another medium. And the cool thing about that other medium is that it's flat and it's portable and it can go everywhere and it translates really well into social media. So I was able to use those images to kind of get my point across and get what I had to say out there. Again, it's all in service of communicating what I see and kind of the documenting the world that we have to the greatest possible extent. The prints from the second trip show a facility with the material and a facility with the ink and with the printing press and with the paper. And that's why you have these 2 basic bodies of work, one which is fairly simple but I think very clear, and the other one which is a little bit more complex and complicated. And there's a lot more gray tone. Gray tone was something that I had to learn to use. It's not something that I have any access to here. I've got black and white and line. And that's about it. With the printing, it's all about shades of gray. It's all about clearing out spaces for white and black and then having lots of variation in the middle. And trying to manage those things when I didn't, well, trying to manage those things when I didn't know I had to manage those things just was not possible for me. I'd like to talk a little bit about the different kinds of work that are up here. There are essentially 3 different techniques that I use to finish the pieces. They're all sgraffito, which is when I take a piece of porcelain and I cover it with black clay, which I mix up myself, and then I etch through that layer. So they all start as white squishy clay, and then I mold them, and then I carve them. Each of these is carved with a knife. And then the black clay is painted on, and I put on about 5 really thin coats, and then I just start drawing. And as much as I can, I try and allow my subconscious mind to be the artist. I just firmly believe that my subconscious is a way better artist than my conscious mind. You know, if I'm trying to control everything, then I'm limited to what I know at that point when I start. And I'm kind of limited to what my conception of where this piece is going to be at the end when I begin. You know, I'm a Yankee, like, why would I do that? Why would I spend all this time if I know how it's going to work out at the end? There's no progress there for me. There's no payback. So I try and keep my conscious mind as occupied as possible and keep it out of the way so that I can be surprised and I can learn and I can have growth on each piece. So they take a long time, and they usually wind up in different places than where I think. I may, in terms of this one, like I knew that I was going to draw some woodcocks, but I didn't really know how that was all going to work out. And then when I started working with the shape, I recognized that I could build depth going out from however you look at it. And I wanted to make sure that no matter how you looked at this, it made sense. And what I wound up drawing was a woodcock migration from a woodcock's perspective. I didn't know that's what I was drawing when I started, but by the end, it became clear, like, oh, I am the woodcock in this case. There you go. So that was a learning experience for me. And that's what I expect of myself when I'm drawing, when I'm etching. One of the things that I have a really hard time capturing on these porcelain pieces is the idea of chance or natural variation or chaos. Everything that I put on here, like I've been saying, is starting to be a theme, but you know, it's all controlled. Every line that's there is supposed to be there. It's deliberate. So if I want to describe something that's much squishier than that, I have a really hard time doing that. It tends to look really contrived, because it is. It's controlled. How do you describe chaos in a controlled way? I haven't figured that out yet. So I need to rely on my firing process to be able to do that. So this is heat. This is the result of just heat, right? And sometimes in a kiln, if I want a little bit of chaos, I want a little bit of variation, then I add salt. And that changes the surface. Sometimes it melts the surface, it gives me a variation in color. Sometimes it gives me a little metallic sheen. I never really know what's going to happen when I just add salt. I know it'll do something, but I don't know what. So this is salt. There's a mixed flock vase over there that is salt as well. Same clay, same slip, same firing. This one came out this beautiful navy blue. That one came out that beautiful green. Cool. That's why I do it. And then sometimes if I really, really want there to be a lot of chaos, and that's actually what I'm really talking about, then I fire these pieces in a wood kiln. And then you come up with something like this. So this is an immature bald eagle, and I fired this in a wood kiln at Watershed, Center for Ceramic Arts. They have a big catenary arch kiln that I use up there. And that is like maximum chaos, maximum chance. The way that works is I load up the kiln. I'm usually doing it with a number of other people. We load up the kiln, we fill it full of pots. And then over the course of about 32 hours, every minute, we chuck in a piece of cordwood. And the kiln is good at holding heat faster than it loses it. And so it just naturally heats up. That wood is only burning at like, 500 degrees or something like that, but the heat is building and building and building. And we're controlling the way that the air flows and the way that the air draws in. And it creates all this turbulence. And all that ash is flying around in there. And it turns out that ash is actually a really perfect glaze. It's made up of all of the stuff that glass is made up of. And if you heat it up hot enough, it turns to glass on the surface. And so where you see these variations here, where you see this kind of large orange peel, that's just ash. And that's ash that's melted and beaded up and, in this case, reacted with the cobalt in the slip that I used to create that blue. But again, I never really know how these are going to come out. And that's the point. What I'm really talking about is that idea of just everything being blown away and starting with something that's very ordered and then seeing what happens if we subject it to maximum amounts of chaos. So things like the bald eagle, things like this story of a guy who got chucked overboard, right? Being in chaos and trying to manage that in some way and not really knowing how to do that. That seemed appropriate to me. And so that's why those different pieces look differently. They're deliberate. They're kind of supposed to look like that. Or they're supposed to look like something, right? They're supposed to look different than something like this. Any questions? Not great. So on the stuff that I just put through, either like a gas kiln, just a straight atmosphere, or sometimes an electric kiln, maybe like to carry it the whole way through, like 25 or 30% don't make it. So sometimes it's like, sometimes it's, you know, on these whales, right? These are both the third attempts at these whales. Because those flippers are so fragile and they stick out, and I've got these big hands, and I, you know, get all carried away and I forget, and I'll just ding one off, and then it's a problem. With the wood-fired pieces, it's generally less than that. So on the wood-fired pieces, and to some extent salt, I'm probably at like 50% that I keep, that I like. And then wood, I'm under that. I'm probably at like 40. Good question. When I was a functional potter, so I used to be a functional potter. I'm going to back up. I became a potter because I started when I was 30. And previous to this, I had sold law school textbooks over the phone. I used to have to speak to about 120 lawyers a day, trying to get them to take these law school textbooks. I love the law. That has always been my fallback job. Like, if this artist thing doesn't work out, then I'm going to go to law school or something. I'm feeling a little less like I'm going to need to take that path. But at that time, I didn't know about art. I didn't know that this is where I was going to go. And so I was thinking, like, I think I'll probably be a constitutional lawyer. Anyway, to make a long story short, I had a botched whistleblowing attempt, which I was young and stupid, and I just messed it all up. And they sent me on my way and gave me a severance package. And so I went to the Florida Keys and was like, okay, this is great. I didn't like that path anyway. I'm going to do something this is my big chance. It's my one big chance. I'm going to figure out what I really want to do. So I took my $5,000 and my beat up Subaru and my old wooden canoe and my fly rod and my tent, and that was about all I could fit in there. And I drove down to the Florida Keys, blew the head gasket on the way, but I was like, I'm gonna make it. And I wound up camping down there for about a month and a half, and just kind of letting things even out and kind of shake off the corporate experience and figure out what was next. And this one day, it was a beautiful day, I was out about 6 miles on the flats, and I was seeing turtles, and I was seeing stingrays and spiny lobsters and giant barracuda. And there was a black-tip shark migration going on, so there were all these sharks, and they were just swimming under my boat, and there were tarpon everywhere. And I had taken a stick and I had jammed it into the sand, and had tied my canoe off to that with a piece of rope. And so on one side of me, as far as I can see, is shallow water, about maybe like 1.5 feet deep, and I can see everything out there. It's like being in a fish tank. And then the other side of me was this deep trench which went all the way out to the Gulf of Mexico. And that was beautiful blue water, and I couldn't see a thing. And I was just waiting. I was watching things going from one to the other, and one to the other, and one to the other. And I heard this noise from the blue side, and I turned, and it was a mother dolphin had given birth to a baby, like as close as I am to the camera, and was holding it up at the surface of the water. And I blinked and I looked and I watched for a little bit, and I had this little Instamatic, you know, waterproof camera, and I was like, click, and then put it back down and watched a little bit longer. And the dolphin, when it came up, it was kind of pinkish, and then as it breathed, it turned gray, and then it went down, and then it came back up again, and then they just submerged and swam away. And I thought, geez, you know, this is the moment I'm here for. Like, this specific moment is when I need to make the decision about what's coming next. So I got out a pencil and paper, and I wrote down everything that I wanted for my next life. And it was things like, I want to do physical work. I want a sense of history. I want to do something useful. I love science, and I love being creative. I want to do both of those things. I want those to be in there. I want a sense of community. And I have something to say, I mean, obviously. And I want a platform to be able to do that. And when I got done with this list, the only thing that I could think of was to be a potter. And as far as I know, I'd never really taken pottery before. I'm sure that I had. It's not something that really stands out in my mind. My mom was an art teacher, definitely like my artistic mentor at that time. And we had a wheel, but I don't ever remember using it for anything other than taking my sister Kim and putting her on top and spinning it as fast as we could. But I said, well, great, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be a potter. So I pulled up my stick and I paddled my canoe in, and I had dinner and I went to bed, feeling pretty good. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's this shaking on the ground outside my tent, right next to my head. So I get up and I come out, and it's these two guys, Jeff and Gabe, and they had just come in from West Palm Beach. It was like a 5-hour drive. And they were setting up their tent, and I'm like, Nisa will tell you, I'm terrible to wake up in the middle of the night. And I woke up and I was crabby, as I normally am, and I was like, guys, it's like 3 o'clock. They said, we know, we're sorry, have this beer, sit on that picnic table and just talk to us. We'll be out of your hair in 5 minutes. We'll take you fishing tomorrow. Perfect. Sounds great. So we're talking, doing the what do you do game. And they said, what do you do? And I said, well, just today I decided to be a potter. And I know. Like everybody hears that all the time. And Gabe said, oh, that's great. You can help us with a problem. And I'm like, well, I don't really know anything about it. I mean, I just decided. It's like aspirational. And he said, this one's easy. I've got 500 pounds of clay in the back of my truck and I'm throwing it away. And if you took it off my hands, you'd be doing me a giant favor. And I said, deal. And so I went over and I got that clay and I started learning to make pinch pots that morning. And that was the beginning of my pottery career. I got better than I was that first morning. I think I made like 5 sunflowers. I didn't even know how to make pinch pots. They all kind of came out like plates. But I loved it. And I felt directed. You know, I felt like this was what I was supposed to be doing. This was where I was supposed to be for some reason. And that reason would reveal itself. And so I made functional pottery for 5 years. And I made lots and lots of pieces. I used to throw about 18,000 pounds a year and put them through the kiln. And then one morning I woke up and I kind of remembered that list and I remembered that whole experience and I thought, yeah, I've met all those other things, but I'm not really speaking with my work. I've got all these skills. I can do anything with this material, but I'm not doing it. And so I called up all my stores that morning and I said, I'm really sorry. This was like, 2 weeks before Christmas. Worst timing ever to do this. And I called them up and I was like, I know you're waiting on that work. I know you hate me, or you're going to hate me in like 30 seconds, but I'm not making this stuff anymore. I don't know what I'm making next, but it looks dead to me, and I think it'll just sit on your shelf, and you may not believe me, but I'm really saving us both a lot of hassle. And I'll let you know when I figure out what it is that I'm going to do next. And almost all of them were like, don't bother. Fine, that's okay. And then 3 months later, I started making this black and white work. And the task that I set out with this black and white work was to be as specific as I possibly could. And rather than making 80 pieces a day, which is what I had been making, I wanted to make 1 piece a day. I didn't know what that piece was going to be when I first started, but I knew that I didn't want to glaze very much. And I knew that at that point, I really didn't like doing any wet construction. I really liked throwing on the wheel. And so when you boiled all that stuff down, that really only meant that I could work on the dry surface, and that is basically sgraffito. I didn't really know I could draw when I started that out. I kind of learned to draw on this porcelain. But the drag of the porcelain on the stylus just calmed my hand down. It took all those shakes out. It took all that lack of control that most people have when they're drawing on paper away. And all of a sudden, I could have control over that line. And there was something about the white on the black surface, that stark contrast, which was very appealing to me. I think when we look at really good art, that contrast is one of the first things we notice, right? We don't tend to want to look at a picture that is just all gray. We want whites and blacks and dynamic contrast. And I had always tried to draw before using pencil or pen and trying to achieve that black, and man, you have to work so hard, and I just didn't have good control over the stylus. But then when I started working in black and white, I was like, oh, this is why I'm supposed to be doing this. Interesting thing is that I thought the hard part was getting to that point, but the hard part actually came after that. So then all I had to do at that point was like, okay, so you can say anything. What do you want to say? And my answer to that was to really try not to worry about it. My answer to that was to empower my subconscious mind to say whatever was on my mind the most at that time, and to just trust that that is what I'm supposed to be talking about. And that kind of brings me to today. The thing that is mostly on my mind most of the time is the woods and the water and the animals that live there and our relationship to the earth. And these are the things that really captivate me, and they always have. So I find myself in a really lucky spot of being able to do what I love, talking about things that I've always loved. And that's kind of how I'm here. Yeah?
I'm hearing what you're saying, especially about honoring ancestral practices.
Uh-huh.
And I'm seeing also in the pieces right next to me some reverberations of indigenous and Inuit art forms, especially like bone carving. People exhibit bone carving at the Museum of Ottawa, National Museum. And so I'm just wondering if you're inspired by the work of indigenous and Inuit artists, or whether they're sort of like the traditional practice and artisans, or any contemporary artists that do this and have they've exhibited in galleries.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people see those similarities. My parents had a lot of soapstone carvings growing up, and we had a lot of indigenous art from lots of different traditions when I was growing up, including early American art and craft. It's not my intention to really copy or refer to those things, but I tend to, because I think about this a lot, I think about it as almost like a co-evolution, that I'm describing pretty traditional subject matter, and I don't have used to grayscale. And I'm working, essentially making effigies, right? And I'm working in the most traditional art medium there is, which is clay. And that's how I wrap my hand around that, that conjunction, or wrap my mind around that conjunction. In terms of modern art, I actually really try hard to protect myself from looking at a lot of artwork. I kind of feel like I'm on this path, and my challenge is to direct it less. So I do. I mean, I will look at things and be like, wow, that's really captivating to me, or what have you, but I really don't look to other people for inspiration. I'm kind of on my own path, and I trust it. I don't really know where it's going, but I do feel like it's going somewhere. Good question, though.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah?
So the species that you've been observing and counting and researching, you've been putting them together in relationship.
Yes.
Some of these I assume will become extinct.
Yes.
Relationships will change.
Yes.
Disappear.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a thread is that through your work now?
Yeah, so the question for those of you on this side of the room was that I'm drawing these species and I'm drawing their relationships to each other, and the assumption being that some of them will become extinct, or their relationships will become extinct, and what impact does that have on my work and on me? It's never lost on me that with a few minor examples, every one of these pieces will outlast its subject. And that's why I make it. You know, it's awful, but at the same time, it's my job. And so I try to honor them as much as I can. And understanding that in many cases, these will be the reference to, you know, thousands or million years of that animal's existence. After Microsoft's gone, after the paper's gone, after the metal's gone, after the plastic's gone, these will survive. And that's why I make them. That's why I make them this way. That's why I hand printed that book, right? And that's using the materials that I did. Because those books that only have 2 copies that are printed, that are hand printed, that obviously someone cared very deeply about, are the ones that last a long time. Yeah, great question. Any others?
way your art is speaking to global warming, climate disruption, besides recording species for future generations?
Yeah, I think that that's another one of those future projects for me, or kind of, I shouldn't even say future project. It's kind of a project that I'm working on right now that I have not taken stage 2 on, right? So one of the cool things about the structure of the container ship travel is that it's all reproducible. You know, these shipping routes have been worked out for hundreds of years, and every day or two there's a ship going by exactly the place that I went. And so right now, it was kind of a latitudinal study, right? But if I do this again, and I'm committed to doing this again, timescale, I have no idea. Maybe I had been thinking 10 years, but I actually think 10 years is probably too long. I think probably like 5 years is more like what I need to do. At that point, then it becomes a real longitudinal study of specific places and specific changes of global warming and climate change on those specific things and those specific species. Right now, it's like a snap pole, right? Like this one's ahead, this one's behind, what have you, but I have no idea what tomorrow. It might have been just that when I was going around, like, you know, it was 5 days after the full moon and everything was sleeping or something. It wasn't, but it could have been, or whatever their analogy to that would be. When I go back, or when somebody else goes back and does this study, then that side of things will be able to be more fleshed out. My intention is that all of this work that I'm doing is going to last longer than I do, both in terms of the artifacts that I make, but also in terms of the information that I put out there, and in terms of my observations being able to be reproducible long after I'm gone. I really do see, I mean, I really did see myself on these trips as being the first part of the day a scientist and the second half of the day being an artist. I don't actually see a lot of difference between those two things. One is just taking in information, one is kind of putting out information. But I really believe that art should do something. That yes, art can make a beautiful picture, but ultimately it needs to speak. It's certainly the way that I communicate most effectively. So I don't know if that answers your question. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I love the scientist artist, and then you talked a lot about the subconscious mind and
yes.
through that. And so are there specific moments in some of the pieces that you can point out that were your surprises from your subconscious that
Yeah. Yes. So one of them happened actually at the opening. I don't know if this person is here. But someone came up to me and said, "This piece here, were you thinking about this other person's work? Did you see that movie about that girl with the hummingbird head?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." No, I was sculpting a goddess who had been a human, and that she carried with her all of the scars of being a human when she was a goddess, and what the impact of those scars would be if we were freed from the limitations of our power of being humans, right? And I was thinking a lot about that. And it turned out that what I was sculpting actually wound up being really similar to somebody else's conception of that same question. That was a big surprise to me. So that was one, like I said, the woodcock and the view of that. The views have a lot to do with it. That the perspective that I draw things from, by the time I'm done with the drawing, I have a very clear idea of where specifically my eyeball is in relation. Like if I were in the scene in real life, where my eyeball would be. And sometimes trying to fix that location within or above or around a picture is really illustrative. Where I'm like, huh? Like, did I experience that at some point? Or is this just something that I'm like projecting, or is it empathetic? The bait ball is a good example of that. So I just kind of started drawing these herring, and then all of a sudden I noticed that they were spreading out like that. And it was like I was a bird above a ball of herring with the spotted dolphins pushing them up. Now I've seen them, I've seen thousands of bait balls before, and I've seen hundreds of dolphins pushing them up that way, but I cannot ever remember thinking about, wow, I wonder what that looks like from a bird's eye view. But then, you know, I draw it. So it must have been in there somewhere, right? Like that question must have been in there somewhere. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
So, are you putting all of your work out there into the world, or are you saving some? Are you saving some to be shown collectively after you're long past?
After I'm long past? I have a few pieces that I hold on to, but I don't hold on to them for very long. You know, usually I hold on to them until I've learned what I need to learn from them, and then my time with them is done. Sometimes that time comes before they even really go in the kiln. You know, I'll kind of be like, okay, I know what this is saying. Like, we don't need to go any further here. And then sometimes pieces will come out and they just captivate me for whatever reason, and I'll hold on to them until that captivation is gone, and then I put them out for sale or give them away a lot of times. I throw a lot of work away. So there's a shard pile up at Watershed, which has a ton of my work in it. There's a shard pile buried in Newmarket, New Hampshire, which has a ton of my work on it. There's a shard pile in Roque Bluffs, where my other studio is, my house is, has a ton of work. And then I take a lot of work and I throw it on the beach. And it goes out and it tumbles around, turns into beach glass, and then it washes back up. And then other people can look at it and be like, what is this thing with this squid on it, or whatever. So it all pretty much goes out there. I kind of believe that we're living in a time right now where there aren't a whole lot of personal secrets. There isn't a whole lot of privacy. So I feel like Google or somebody knows about it already, and I don't feel like they should be the only ones. So I put it all out there. I don't want to give them all the power. Right? As much as I love the internet. But. Yeah? This one. Yes, I would love to talk about that piece. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I went out to the bow one day, and I was out there basically at dawn. And I tried to get out there pretty early. Some days I would be up drawing all night long, or if it was really stormy, I wouldn't get out. I had wicked sleep problems out there because the time was changing constantly, right? So I'd lose, in that one, I lost an hour every 2 days. And I just could not catch up. This one morning, I woke up early, I was feeling rested, and we were in the dead center of the South Pacific. And there was no current. The air temperature was like 74 degrees every single day. There was no real wind. And it was just calm as far as you could see. And I had the impression, I had two concurrent thoughts. And the first was that I'd actually never seen the sky and the earth interacting without all of us. You know, and I use the broadest sense of us. People, plants, trees, whatever, kind of getting in the way. And that my conception of what the earth was actually probably more like all the parasites on the earth, right? And so I was out there and I recognized that I was looking at these two distinct beings that I'd been aware of my whole life, but I'd actually never been able to see in their relationship to each other. And there were these tiny swells. I mean, they were like maybe half a meter, about a quarter mile apart. And they were just very, very slowly traversing like this. And just that change of maybe 18 inches in the water surface was enough. There was such stasis there that change in the water surface was enough to change the air pressure enough that there were tiny little thunderclouds at about 200 feet up. And they were moving in perfect harmony with those swells. And I felt like I was in the presence of enlightenment. It was the most peaceful 5 minutes I've ever had in my life. And I felt a deep sense of honor to be seeing this, this relationship, you know, without all of us getting in the way. And that's what that piece is about. Anybody else? I think, good? Yeah, all right. Thank you guys. Thank you all for coming.